The room fell silent the moment Valentina's voice cut through the music. Not because the band stopped playing, not because anyone signaled them to. They stopped because 200 people held their breath at the same time, and somehow the musicians felt it too. Donna had been walking between tables with a water pitcher when it happened. She had done this exact thing 1,000 times in this exact ballroom. Her steps were practiced, quiet, professional. She knew the distance between every chair. She knew which guests leaned back when they laughed, and which ones sat rigid all evening. She knew the floor the way a person knows the inside of their own home in the dark. But the veil caught her off guard. Valentina had turned without warning, and the long lace edge of her wedding veil swung out behind her like a white wing. Donna's arm grazed it. Not a pull, not a tear, a graze. The kind of contact that happens at crowded events every single day, and means nothing at all. Valentina froze. She looked down at the veil. Then she looked up at Donna, and something shifted in her face. Not pain, not even real anger. Something cooler than that. Something that had been waiting all evening for a place to land. "Excuse me," Valentina said. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that expects the world to lean in. Donna stopped. She turned. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to catch your veil. I hope it's not damaged." Valentina looked at her the way a person looks at something that doesn't belong in the room. Slowly, deliberately, top to bottom. "It's not the veil," she said. Donna waited. "It's the fact that you can barely move between the tables without knocking into people." Valentina continued. She said it clearly, the way someone says a thing they have rehearsed. "This is a formal event. There are standards. And frankly, the uniform doesn't fit you properly. It doesn't fit the aesthetic of the evening at all." Someone at the nearest table looked away. Someone else picked up their champagne glass for no reason except to have something to do with their hands. Donna did not look away. She kept her expression steady. "I understand," she said. "I apologize for the inconvenience." "I don't want an apology," Valentina said. She turned toward the hotel manager, a thin man named Gerald, who had appeared at the edge of the room the way hotel managers always appeared when something went wrong, as if they could smell it from a distance. "I want her moved off the floor. I don't want her serving my tables for the rest of the evening." Gerald came forward. He was a man who had navigated difficult guests for 20 years, and his face was trained to show nothing. "Mrs. Calloway, I understand your concern, and I want to make sure." "It's not a concern," Valentina said. "It's a request. A simple one." The word simple hit the air like a small stone dropped in still water. Everyone near enough to hear it felt the ripple. Gerald glanced at Donna. Donna met his eyes briefly, then looked away. She set the water pitcher down on a nearby service cart. She straightened her jacket. She nodded once, not at Gerald, not at Valentina, but at no one in particular. A small, private nod. The kind that means, "I have heard this before." The kind that means, "I will not give this room the satisfaction of seeing me break." She walked toward the service corridor. Her steps were even. Her back was straight. She did not rush. The band started playing again. The guests found their conversations. Valentina turned back to her table and accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a different server, one who was apparently more suitable for the aesthetic of the evening. And, at table 9, near the back of the room, a man who had said nothing watched all of it. His name was Enzo Caruso. He was 61 years old. He had arrived alone, been seated without fuss, and had spent the better part of the evening doing what he always did at events like this, watching. Not in an obvious way, not in the way of someone who wants to be noticed watching, in the way of someone who has spent decades reading rooms and has become very good at it. He had a glass of wine in front of him that he had barely touched. He had eaten what was placed before him without comment. He had not introduced himself to the people at his table, and the people at his table had not introduced themselves to him, because something about the way he sat made introductions feel unnecessary. He was simply there, solid, quiet, present in a way that made the air around him feel different. He had watched Donna move through the room all evening. He had watched the way she worked, the way she refilled a glass before the guest noticed it was low, the way she cleared a plate with one hand without leaning across anyone, the way she smiled without making it a performance. He had noticed all of it the way he noticed everything, without recording it, just letting it settle. And then, he had watched what Valentina did. He watched the whole thing. He did not look away. He did not shift in his seat or lean over to whisper something to the person beside him. He simply watched. His expression did not change. His hands stayed still on the table. After Donna disappeared into the service corridor, and the noise of the room returned to normal, Enzo picked up his phone. He did not scroll. He did not check messages. He found a contact and pressed call. It rang once. "It's me," he said. A pause, then 4 words. "Find out her name." He ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. He picked up his wine glass. He looked at the dance floor, where the bride was now laughing at something her maid of honor had said, her head thrown back, her veil perfectly intact. He took a slow sip of wine. The evening continued exactly as planned. In the service corridor, Donna sat on a metal folding chair outside the staff break room. She had not gone inside yet, because she needed a moment first. Just a moment. Her hands were flat on her thighs. Her breathing was controlled. She was doing the things she had learned to do over many years of standing in rooms where people looked through her rather than at her. She was letting it pass through her without letting it in. It didn't always work, but she tried every time. She was 40 minutes from the end of her shift. 40 minutes. She had worked 11 years in this hotel. She had handled difficult guests before. She had been snapped at, dismissed, ignored, and once, memorably, had a glass of sparkling water spilled on her intentionally by a man who thought it was funny. She had kept going. She had always kept going. But there was something about being critiqued for the way her body fit a uniform in front of 200 strangers that settled differently. It didn't burn hot. It settled cold, quiet and cold, the way the worst things do. She was not going to cry. She had decided that years ago, somewhere around her 3rd year at the Meridian, after an incident at a corporate dinner that she didn't like to think about, she had cried in her car that night, and she had decided, not here, not in this building, not on company time. Whatever she felt, she would feel it later, on her own terms, in her own space. So she sat with her hands on her thighs and breathed, and after 4 minutes, Gerald came through the corridor door. He looked like he had aged slightly in the last 20 minutes. "Donna," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll collect my things." "That's not—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider. "Don't go anywhere yet. I've had an instruction come in and I need to make a call before anything happens." Donna looked at him. What kind of instruction? Gerald's expression was the expression of a man navigating something he didn't fully understand yet. "The kind," he said carefully, "that I need to take seriously." He went back through the door. Donna sat in the folding chair for another 3 minutes. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a pen and a small notepad she always carried for orders. She turned to a blank page. She wrote nothing on it. She just held it, because holding something solid helped. In the ballroom, the cake was being cut. Valentina smiled for the photographs. The photographer moved around her like a planet orbiting a sun. The guests clapped. Marcus, the groom, kissed her cheek and whispered something that made her laugh, and the flash went off, and everyone agreed it was a beautiful moment. No one at the reception said Donna's name for the rest of the evening. No one except one man, on a phone call that had already ended, who now sat at table 9 with his wine glass and his stillness, and the particular patience of someone who has learned that the most significant things rarely announce themselves. The evening ended at midnight. The guests filtered out in pairs and small groups, trailing flower petals and good wishes, and the smell of expensive perfume. The last car pulled away from the entrance at 12:47. The cleaning crew moved in. Donna was still in the building. She was not cleaning. She was sitting in Gerald's office, on the other side of his desk, watching him read something on his computer screen, with an expression she had never seen on his face before. He read it twice. Then he looked up at her. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 11 years, she said. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "How would you feel about a different conversation than the one I thought we were going to have tonight?" Outside, the ballroom was being stripped of flowers. The champagne towers were gone. The white orchids were already wilting in the warmth of the night air. And in Gerald's quiet office, with the sound of the cleaning crew humming faintly through the walls, something was beginning that had nothing to do with the bride, and everything to do with 11 years of a woman who showed up and did the work and never once asked anyone to notice. Donna Marte had grown up in a small town that most people drove through without stopping. It was the kind of place where the gas station and the diner were owned by the same family, where the school had one hallway, and where the idea of leaving was either the most obvious thing in the world or the most terrifying, depending on who you asked. For Donna, it was both, and she carried both feelings with her on the bus she took at 23 years old with 2 bags, $40 in her wallet, and absolutely no plan beyond arriving somewhere larger than where she had been. She arrived in the city on a Tuesday in October. It was raining. She found a room in a house shared by 4 other women, none of whom she knew, and spent her first night listening to the traffic outside and deciding that the sound of it was either terrifying or exciting, and she was going to choose exciting because she needed something to hold on to. She found the Meridian Hotel 2 weeks later. She had applied to 4 other places before that. A coffee shop that never called back, a department store that called back and then told her the position had been filled, a restaurant where the manager looked at her for 3 seconds and said, "We'll be in touch," in a way that meant they wouldn't. And then the Meridian, where a woman named Carol, who ran the banquet hiring desk with the efficiency of someone who had seen everything twice, looked at Donna's application for 30 seconds and said, "Can you start Thursday?" Donna said yes before Carol finished the sentence. She had never worked in formal hospitality before. She learned fast, not because someone sat her down and trained her carefully, but because she watched. She watched the experienced servers the way a person watches a language being spoken before they learn to speak it themselves. She noticed the economy of movement that the good ones had. No wasted steps, no hesitation at the table. She noticed how they read the energy of a room and adjusted without being told. She noticed that the guests who tipped generously were not always the guests who seemed the most pleased. Sometimes it was the quiet ones. Sometimes it was the ones who had asked for something small and received it without having to ask twice. She absorbed all of it. By the end of her first year, she was being requested by name for private events, not because she was the loudest personality on the floor or the most polished looking, because she was reliable, because she remembered, because when a guest at a corporate dinner had mentioned, offhand, that he was avoiding gluten, Donna had quietly swapped his bread roll without making him feel like he needed to make an announcement, because when an elderly woman at a retirement luncheon had difficulty reading the menu, Donna had crouched down beside her and read it aloud in a low voice, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. She did these things without thinking about them. She did them because they were what the situation called for, and because she had grown up in a house where you noticed what people needed and you tried to meet it, not because someone told you to, but because it was the right thing to do. The Meridian became her world in the way that a person's work can become their world when they are good at it, and when they feel, at some level, that they belong to it even if it doesn't always behave as though it belongs to them. She had colleagues she was fond of. A woman named Petra who had worked the floor since before Donna arrived, and who brought leftover rice cakes every Tuesday, for reasons she never fully explained, and that no one questioned. A young man named Oliver, who had started 6 months ago, and who was still learning, but was learning fast, and who reminded Donna of herself in a way that made her quietly protective of him. A sommelier named Louis, who was technically above their pay grade to befriend, but who brought coffee to the break room every Friday morning, and sat with whoever was there, and talked about whatever was being talked about. These were her people, not in a formal way, in the way of people who share a floor, and a rhythm, and an unspoken agreement that they will look out for one another. And there was Harold. Harold was the section chief for banquet operations. He was a wide-shouldered man with reading glasses that sat at the end of his nose and a voice that had exactly one volume, which was the volume of someone who has no interest in being dramatic, but needs to be heard across a room. He had been at the Meridian for 19 years. He knew everything that happened in the banquet division before it was officially reported to him, because people told him things as a matter of course. Harold had noticed Donna within her first year, not in any complicated way. He simply noticed that she was excellent, and that she was being overlooked in the way that excellent people who do not push for attention are often overlooked. He had put her name forward for the hotel's Employee of the Year recognition 3 years running. The first year, The award went to a young man in the front desk division who had handled a public relations situation with impressive calm. Donna had congratulated him sincerely. Harold had said nothing. The second year, the award went to someone in the concierge department. Donna hadn't even known she was nominated that time. She found out afterward, from Petra, who had heard it from someone in HR. She had shrugged and said, "Maybe next year." Petra had said, "Maybe they should open their eyes," which was strong language for Petra. The third year, Harold told Donna directly, before the announcement, that her name was on the list. He wanted her to know. He thought she deserved to know. The award went to a woman in the catering coordination office who had organized a particularly complex conference schedule. Donna found Harold in the corridor afterward and said, "Thank you for putting my name forward." Harold looked at her over the tops of his reading glasses and said, "Donna, I want you to know I have not given up." She had smiled. "I know," she said. "Neither have I." And she meant it. She genuinely meant it, because she was not a bitter person. Bitterness had visited her. She knew what it felt like, the way a person knows the shape of a room they've been in once. But she hadn't let it stay. There was no point. Bitterness didn't change anything except you. What she was, honestly, was tired. Not physically. She was strong. Her feet ached sometimes after long shifts, and there was a wrist she had fractured 3 years ago that tightened up in cold weather. But that was the ordinary wear of physical work, and she accepted it without complaint. What tired her was the accumulation, the years of being looked through, the repeated experience of doing excellent work and having it register in the small, private ledger that only she could see, the smiles and nods and thank yous from guests that dissolved the moment she walked away from the table. She didn't need the recognition. She had never been someone who needed the recognition. But there is a difference between not needing something and never once wishing for it. And Donna was honest enough with herself to know where she stood on that particular line. The night Valentina pointed at her in the ballroom and said the uniform didn't fit the aesthetic, the tiredness was what Donna felt most. Not anger, not humiliation, though that was present too, quiet and familiar. Mostly she felt tired, in the deep way of someone who has carried a weight for a long time and has, in that moment, felt it grow heavier. She had set the water pitcher down. She had walked out, and she had sat in the corridor, in a folding chair, because that was what was available, and because she needed to be somewhere that wasn't the ballroom. She thought about the woman who had said those things. She didn't know her name. She knew her table number, the way she knew every table number, but names she collected from reservation lists, and these she had not reviewed before the event. She thought about the look on the woman's face, not cruelty exactly, something more practiced than cruelty, the look of someone who had performed this kind of dismissal before and knew it would be received the way it had always been received, with apology, with retreat, with the quiet surrender of whoever was on the receiving end. Donna had given her the apology and the retreat. She was not ashamed of that. She had been professional. She had been correct. She had not given her the surrender, because inside she had not surrendered, and that was the thing that mattered. She sat in the corridor and breathed, and she thought, as she sometimes allowed herself to think, "I am good at this. I am genuinely good at this. And one day, someone with the authority to do something about it is going to see it." She had held that thought for 11 years. It was thinner now than it used to be, but she had not let it go. What she didn't know, sitting in that folding chair outside the break room, was that tonight was different. What she didn't know was that a man at table 9 had spent 22 years building a reputation for watching things that other people missed, and for acting on what he saw without requiring the situation to present itself formally or loudly. He had built 3 hotel properties in this city, not by making announcements but by making decisions, quiet ones that landed where they were intended to land without fanfare, without explanation, and without reversing. What she didn't know was that he had already made one. Gerald came back into the corridor, with the look of a man who had just had a conversation he was not going to summarize in its entirety. He told Donna to wait. She waited. She was good at waiting. She was still holding the notepad. She hadn't written anything on it. She put it back in her apron pocket. The phone on Gerald's desk rang 3 times that night. Each time, his face rearranged itself slightly, the way a person's face does when they receive information that requires them to update something they thought they understood. Donna watched him from across the desk and thought, whatever is happening, it is not what I expected when I walked into this room. She was right. She was more right than she knew. Outside, the last of the wedding guests had gone. The white orchids from the centerpieces were being collected and boxed. Someone on the cleaning crew was whistling something quiet and pleasant that carried faintly through the walls. Inside the office, Gerald looked at Donna with an expression she couldn't quite read, because it was a complicated expression. It had something in it that looked almost like relief, and something that looked almost like apology, and something that looked like he was choosing his next words with more care than usual. Donna, he said, do you remember applying for the senior floor supervisor position about 8 months ago? She looked at him. Yes, she said. I remember being told the process was ongoing. The process, Gerald said, has concluded. A pause settled between them. Donna waited. It concluded tonight, he said. She kept her expression still. Her hands were quiet in her lap. Her voice, when she spoke, was the same voice she used when she was reading a menu item to a guest who couldn't see the print clearly. Low, steady, unhurried. What does that mean, Gerald? He looked at her over the desk, and he said it plainly, without decoration, because the situation didn't require decoration. It means the position is yours, if you want it. The cleaning crew was still working somewhere down the hall. The whistling continued. It was a song Donna half recognized but couldn't name. She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at her hands. Then she looked back at Gerald. Who made this decision? She asked. Gerald considered his answer. Then he said, someone who was in the building tonight and saw what happened. Someone whose opinion carries weight here. Someone at table 9, Donna said. It wasn't a question. She had put it together quietly, the way she put most things together, without making a production of it. Gerald said nothing, which was its own kind of confirmation. Donna nodded. She looked at the wall behind his desk for a moment. Then she said, I'll need to think about it. Of course, Gerald said. I'll give you my answer Monday, she said. That's fine. She stood. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. Then she stopped with her hand on the frame and said, without turning around, Gerald, was I ever actually going to get this position through the normal process? Gerald was quiet for a long time. I think, he said, finally, that you should have had it 2 years ago. Donna nodded once. She walked out into the corridor. She walked past the ballroom, where the cleaning crew was now stacking chairs. She walked through the lobby, which was empty and quiet and marble-floored and bright, the way hotel lobbies always were at this hour, as if they were waiting for something. She walked out the front door. The night air was cool. She stood on the top step for a moment and breathed it in. Then she walked down to the street and started home, and she did not think about Valentina once the whole way there. She thought about Harold. She thought about the look he had given her in the corridor 3 years ago, when he said he hadn't given up. She thought about Tuesday rice cakes and Friday morning coffee, and Oliver, who was still learning, and learning fast. She walked home under streetlights, and for the first time in a long while, she walked without the weight. Nobody in the hotel talked about Enzo Caruso openly. This was not because they were afraid of him. It was because there was a particular kind of power that doesn't require announcement, and the people who worked at the Meridian for any length of time came to understand that this man was one of those rare cases where the power and the person had become so completely aligned that drawing attention to one felt like the other would simply appear behind you and raise an eyebrow. The sommelier, Louis, had been at the Meridian longer than most. He was the one who had brought the 2014 Barolo out of the cellar 2 hours before the wedding reception began, not because someone asked, because the reservation had come in under a name that meant something to him, and when that name appeared, you prepared. He had explained the wine selection to no one. When young Oliver asked why Table 9 was getting a separate bottle rather than the event house wine, Louis had looked at him for exactly 2 seconds and then said, because that's what Table 9 gets. Oliver, who was still learning, filed this under things he would understand later. The general manager's name was Richard Holt, And Richard Holt had been managing this property for 6 years, which was the longest he had stayed anywhere in a 23-year career in hotel management. He had stayed because the Meridian was the best property he had ever worked. And the Meridian was the best property he had ever worked, because whoever owned it invested in it with the kind of quiet, consistent attention that made a building feel like it was genuinely cared for. He had met Enzo Caruso twice in 6 years. Both times briefly. Both times the meeting had consisted of a handshake, a short direct conversation about whatever Richard had recently submitted in his quarterly operations report, and then Caruso saying, "Good work," in a way that was clearly neither a dismissal nor a formality, but a straightforward observation, the way a person observes that the weather is clear. Richard had gone home both times and described the meeting to his wife as the most comfortable meeting he had ever had. He had not known Caruso would be at the wedding reception. He found out when Louis called the front desk just after 7 in the evening and said, "Table 9 is occupied." Richard had left his dinner half-eaten and gone to the ballroom himself to verify the seating arrangement personally, which was not his job and which no one questioned. By the time Richard received the first phone call from Caruso, shortly after 10:30, the situation with the waitress had already been reported to him by Gerald, who had caught him in the corridor near the kitchen, with an expression that made Richard immediately put down the glass he was carrying. Gerald had told him what happened in 30 seconds. Richard had needed 5 seconds to respond, because he needed the 5 seconds to make sure his response was the right one. "Is she still in the building?" he asked. "Yes," Gerald said. "She's in the corridor." "Keep her there," Richard said. "I need to make a call first." He was halfway to his office when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He answered before the second ring. "Mr. Caruso," he said. "Richard." Caruso's voice was the same as it was in person, level, unhurried, with the weight of someone who has never once needed to raise his voice to be taken seriously. "I understand there was an incident on the floor this evening." "Yes, sir. I was just made aware." "I'd like to tell you what I saw," Caruso said. "Then I'd like to tell you what I want to happen." Richard sat down in his office chair. He picked up a pen, not because he expected to take notes, but because holding something helped him focus. Caruso described what he had seen with the economy of someone who has told precise stories for a long time. He did not dramatize. He did not add emotional weight. He described the contact with the veil. He described what the bride had said and the way she had said it. He described how the server had responded, how she had set down the pitcher, how she had walked out. "She didn't rush," Caruso said. "She took her time. She held herself together completely, in front of 200 people." There was a brief silence. "I want to know who she is," Caruso said. Richard called Gerald while Caruso held. Gerald told him, "Donna Marte, 11 years of service. Excellent record, no formal complaints against her. Harold from Banquet Operations had nominated her for Employee of the Year 3 times. Richard relayed this. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. 3 times, Caruso said. 3 times, Richard confirmed. "And the supervisor position," Caruso said. "The one that's been open since March. Has she been considered for it?" Richard was quiet for a moment. "She applied," he said. "The process has been ongoing." The silence that followed was the kind that means something. "Richard," Caruso said, "I want that position offered to her tonight." Richard sat very still. "Tonight," he repeated. "Before she leaves the building," Caruso said. "Yes, sir. And I want a conduct policy drafted, in writing, for all 3 properties. Clear language about how guests are permitted to address service staff. If a guest behaves the way this woman behaved tonight, the event team has the authority to act. I don't want it left to individual managers to navigate in the moment." Richard was writing now, pen moving across the notepad. "Understood. And the gratuity pool from tonight's event," Caruso said. "I want it reviewed. The distribution should reflect the service actually provided. If there are grounds to adjust it through the event contract terms, adjust it. I'll check the contract language." "Good." A pause. "How is she?" Richard blinked. "Sir?" "The server," Caruso said. "Donna. How is she?" Richard thought about this. "Gerald says she's calm," he said. Professional. She hasn't raised her voice. She hasn't asked to file a complaint. She just sat down and waited. Another silence. Not the heavy kind. The thoughtful kind. "Make sure she's comfortable," Caruso said. And Richard. "Yes. Make sure Gerald is the one who tells her, not HR, not a memo. Gerald." Of course. The call ended. Richard sat in his chair for a moment looking at his notepad. Then he stood up and did 3 things in a specific order, because the order mattered. He checked the event contract for the Callaway wedding. It had a gratuity clause, the way all their private event contracts did, with a note that distribution was at management discretion in cases of service irregularity. It was there. In writing. It had always been there, drafted by the event's legal team 3 years ago as a standard protective measure. Richard had never had reason to invoke it. Tonight was the first time. He made a note to the event's finance coordinator for the next morning. Then he drafted a short document, 3 paragraphs, clear language. The way Caruso had said, "This is how guests speak to staff at our properties. This is what the event team is authorized to do if this standard is not met. This is not negotiable, and it is not discretionary." He sent it to the HR director, the events director, and the senior managers of all 3 properties, with a note marked for immediate review and implementation pending legal sign-off. Then he went to Gerald's office. Gerald was already there. Donna was across the desk from him. Richard stood in the doorway for a moment, not entering, just looking. He saw a woman sitting with her hands in her lap, and her posture completely straight, and her face absolutely composed. She looked like someone who had been sitting in difficult rooms for a long time, and had learned to be present in them without letting the difficulty define the moment. Richard backed away from the doorway. He let Gerald do it. He stood in the corridor and listened. He couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of 2 people talking, and then a long pause, and then a shorter exchange. He heard the sound of a chair moving. He returned to his office. At table 9, long after the last guest had gone, Richard Holt sat down in the chair where Enzo Caruso had sat. He looked at the room. The cleaning crew was moving through it methodically, working table by table. The white orchids were in boxes near the kitchen entrance. The champagne towers were gone. He thought about 11 years of a woman bringing a notepad and a water pitcher, and a level of care that most people never noticed. He thought about a 61-year-old man who sat in the back of a room and noticed everything. He thought about how rarely those 2 things happened to align. In the morning, he would call Harold personally. He would tell him before Donna did, because Harold deserved to hear it, and because Richard wanted to hear the silence on the other end of the phone that would come when Harold understood what had happened. Harold had put her name forward 3 times. Richard wanted him to know that it had mattered. He wanted Harold to know that someone had finally seen what he had been trying to show them. He wasn't sure Harold would believe him right away. He wouldn't blame him. He picked up his phone and scrolled to the number he needed. It was late. He would call in the morning. He set the phone back down. The cleaning crew finished table 9. They moved on to table 10. Richard sat there for another minute in the empty room. Then he got up, buttoned his jacket, and went home. 3 properties, hundreds of staff, thousands of guests a year, and 1 phone call made in 1 evening by a man who sat in the back of a room and watched a woman walk out of a ballroom with her chin level and her steps even. That was all it had taken. 1 person in the right seat, paying attention. The strangest part, Richard thought on his way to the parking garage, was that this was not actually strange at all. This was how it was supposed to work. It just rarely did. Meanwhile, across the city, in a honeymoon suite on the 42nd floor of a coastal hotel they had booked 18 months in advance, Valentina Callaway was awake at 2 in the morning, reading the congratulations messages on her phone. There were hundreds of them. She read each one slowly. The photographs from the evening had been shared already, the ones the photographer had released for preview, and they were beautiful. The lighting, the flowers, her dress, the expression on her face when she turned toward the camera, effortless and radiant, the way she had practiced without ever admitting she had practiced. Her husband Marcus was asleep beside her. She listened to him breathe. She thought about the evening, the vows, the first dance, the look on her mother's face when she came down the aisle. She thought briefly about the incident with the waitress. Briefly. The way a person thinks about a speed bump they drove over on the way to a destination they were excited about. It had been a moment, an irritation, the kind of thing that happened at large events when standards slipped. She set her phone down on the bedside table. She looked at the ceiling. She felt completely satisfied with the evening. She felt, actually, that it had gone almost exactly as she had imagined. She closed her eyes. She did not think about Table 9. She had not noticed Table 9, not really. She had not noticed the man who sat there. She had been the center of the room. She had been, for one entire evening, exactly what she had always planned to be, the most important person in the space. She fell asleep in the way of someone who has no idea that a phone call has already been made. Several, in fact. She slept well. Outside the window of the hotel, 42 floors down, the city continued its quiet night business, indifferent and moving, the way cities always are. Marcus Calloway was not a careless man. He was precise in the way that people in his profession had to be precise. Attentive to detail, careful with language, methodical in his thinking. He had built his consulting firm over 9 years from a 2-person operation in a rented office to a mid-size firm with a staff of 41 and a client list that included several accounts significant enough to make him feel, on most mornings, that the work had been worth it. He was not a man who panicked. He was not a man who catastrophized. When problems arose in his professional life, he approached them the way he approached most things, calmly, analytically, with the confidence of someone who had been in difficult situations before and had always found a way through. So when his phone rang at 9:23 on the morning after his wedding, and the name on the screen was his senior account manager, Colin, he answered it with the mild expectation that, whatever the issue was, it was manageable. He walked out onto the suite's balcony so as not to wake Valentina. The coastal air was already warm. Below, the hotel's pool caught the morning light. "Colin," he said. There was a pause on the other end that Marcus immediately categorized as an unusual pause. Not the pause of someone choosing the right word, the pause of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say and has arrived at it anyway, wishing they didn't have to. "Marcus," Colin said, "I'm sorry to call on your honeymoon. I wouldn't if it weren't." "What happened?" Colin told him. Their largest client, a holdings group that had been with the firm for 4 years and accounted for nearly 40% of their annual revenue, had contacted the firm's client services coordinator late the previous evening. The contact had not been a complaint. It had been a formal notice. They were beginning the process of reviewing their service agreement. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Reviewing," he said. "What does that mean exactly?" "Review with the intention of renegotiating, or, they used the word transfer," Colin said. "Possible transfer." The word landed quietly. Marcus moved to the balcony railing and looked at the pool below without seeing it. "Did they give a reason?" "The coordinator asked for clarification," Colin said. "The liaison at their end said only that certain concerns had come to their attention regarding conduct." "Conduct," Marcus repeated. That was the word. Conduct in what sense? Financial conduct? Professional conduct? "I don't know," Colin said. "I've tried reaching the liaison again this morning. No response yet. I've also put in a call to their general counsel's office because I thought if there was a specific compliance issue." "No," Marcus said. "Don't do that. If we go straight to legal, it signals that we're worried, and we shouldn't signal anything until we understand what we're dealing with." "Agreed," Colin said. Marcus stood on the balcony for a long moment. The horizon was flat and bright. A boat moved slowly across the water in the far distance. "Has this happened before?" he asked, though he knew the answer. He asked it anyway, because sometimes the act of asking helped him think. "Never," Colin said. 4 years, Marcus said. "Not a complaint, not a fee dispute, not a missed deadline. Nothing," Colin said. "And now conduct." The word was bothering him, not because it was a serious word, though it was, because it was a vague one. Conduct could mean many things. Conduct could mean something in his firm's internal culture. It could mean a specific interaction. It could mean something he hadn't been told about yet. He told Colin to keep trying to reach the liaison. He told him to document everything, and share it only with the two senior partners who needed to know. He told him not to raise it with the wider staff until they knew what they were dealing with. Then he ended the call. He stood on the balcony for several minutes. He thought back over the past several weeks. He had not had any unusual client interactions. He had not been party to any disputes. He had been distracted, yes, consumed by the wedding preparations the way anyone would be, but the firm had run in his absence the way it was designed to run. He thought about the word conduct. He went back inside. Valentina was awake, sitting up in bed with her phone, scrolling through the morning's congratulations with the focused pleasure of someone cataloging something precious. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Who called?" "Colin," Marcus said. "Something with a client. Minor thing." He was not ready to tell her yet, because he didn't have enough information to tell a story that wouldn't immediately become a panic. And managing Valentina's panic was not how he wanted to spend the first morning of their honeymoon. "Tell him you're unavailable until next week," she said, still scrolling. "I'll handle it," he said. He showered. He dressed. He ordered breakfast from room service and sat across the table from his wife and made conversation about the photographs and the flowers and whether the band had been worth the price, which she felt strongly they had been, and he agreed, because the alternative was a 30-minute debate. He watched her talk and he thought, conduct. He could not place it. 48 hours later, he placed it. He had gone through every client communication from the past 2 months. He had reached the liaison, finally, on a call that the man had taken with the particular tone of someone who has been briefed on what to say and what not to say. The call had lasted 4 minutes. Marcus had learned nothing specific, but in those 4 minutes, the liaison had said one sentence that he had not been prepared to say, and had said it almost by accident. "It's not a business issue. It's more of a personal impression." Personal impression. Marcus sat with that for a day. He ran it against everything he knew about the past several months. He ran it against every conversation he'd had with this client. He ran it against events, dinners, meetings. He landed on the wedding. He didn't know why at first. He landed on it, and then he sat with the feeling of having landed on it, and slowly began to examine why. And he thought about who had been there. The client firm's managing director had not attended, but his business development lead had. A man named Patrick, who Marcus had known for 3 years, who was quiet and perceptive, and who had been at a table near the back of the ballroom all evening. Marcus picked up his phone. He sent Patrick a short message. Not a question, just a note. "Hope you enjoyed the evening. Would value a quick word when you have a moment." Patrick replied 4 hours later with a time. The call was uncomfortable. Patrick was a decent person, and decent people do not enjoy being the messenger of information that could damage a professional relationship. He started with 3 sentences about the wedding being lovely and the food being good. Then he said, "Marcus, I have to be honest with you, and I hope you understand I'm telling you this as someone who respects you." Marcus said, "Please." Patrick told him what he had seen. He described it simply. The veil, the waitress, the things Valentina had said in front of 200 guests, the waitress walking out. "I've been in a lot of rooms," Patrick said. "A lot of dinners, a lot of events. I've seen people have bad moments. What I saw wasn't a bad moment. It was a choice, and it wasn't a small one." There was a pause. "You understand that the way someone treats a service worker in public is information," Patrick said. "It tells you something about how they think about people. And when someone in your personal life behaves that way, it becomes your information too. I don't think that's unfair." Marcus said, "No, it's not unfair." He meant it. He sat with the call for a long time after it ended. He did not tell Valentina that night. He told her 4 days into the honeymoon, when they were sitting at dinner on the hotel terrace, and he had run out of ways to be distracted by the view. He told her as directly as he could. He told her what Patrick had said. He told her why the client was reviewing the contract. He told her that 40% of their revenue was in question, and that the reason was the 3 minutes she had spent in the ballroom of the Meridian Hotel talking to a waitress. Valentina put down her fork. "That's not fair," she said. "I know it doesn't feel fair," Marcus said. "I was stressed," she said. "It was my wedding day. Things happen." "I know." She touched my veil. I know that too. And this person, this Patrick, is going to damage our business because I had a moment? Marcus looked at her carefully. Patrick is a decent man, he said, and he told me what he saw. What he saw was you standing in front of 200 people and telling a woman that her body didn't fit the aesthetic of your event. Valentina was quiet. That's what happened, Marcus said, not unkindly but clearly. That's what he saw. That's what a room full of people saw. The terrace around them was warm and light and beautiful. Other couples ate at nearby tables. A string quartet was playing somewhere inside. Valentina picked up her fork again. She put it down. She picked up her wine glass. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to call the client on Monday, Marcus said. I'm going to be straightforward with them. And I'm going to spend the next several months doing very good work and trusting that it matters. And if it doesn't work, then we deal with that, he said. But I'm not going to lie to them, and I'm not going to pretend I don't understand why this happened. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, You're angry with me. He considered this. Not angry, he said. I'm trying to understand. She looked out at the water. The string quartet shifted to a slower piece. I don't remember her name, Valentina said. The waitress. No, Marcus said. Did you know it? No, he said. But I think she had been working that hotel for a long time. Valentina was quiet again. Then, did something happen? After? With the hotel? Marcus thought about Colin's call. He thought about Patrick's call. He thought about the single email that had come in to the hotel's client communications address the day after the wedding, which had been forwarded to him by accident before the hotel's PR coordinator realized it was addressed internally, and which he had read twice before deciding not to mention it to anyone. The email had included a note about a conduct policy effective immediately at all 3 Caruso properties, and a second note about a gratuity redistribution from the prior evening's event contract. He had looked up the name at the top of the letterhead. He had recognized it. He looked at his wife across the dinner table, her profile in the evening light, the way she was watching the water with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. I think some things happened at the hotel. Yes, he said. What kind of things? The right kind, he said. She turned to look at him. He picked up his glass. Let's enjoy tonight, he said. We can talk about the rest when we're home. She nodded slowly. She looked back at the water. The meal continued. The music continued. The evening was beautiful, in the way that expensive evenings are engineered to be beautiful. Everything was in place. Marcus sat across from his wife and thought about the word conduct, and the 4 years of a professional relationship, and the particular cost of 3 minutes in a ballroom. He thought, I should have said something. That night, before we left. He had not. He had seen it and he had let it go because it was their wedding, and he had wanted the evening to continue, and he had told himself it was a moment, a high-pressure moment, and that everyone had those. He had been wrong. And the cost of being wrong was sitting in front of him now, in the form of a client he might lose, and a conversation he had not wanted to have on a terrace, in a place this beautiful. He would fix it. He was good at fixing things, but he thought, some things shouldn't need to be fixed. Some things should simply not be done. Across the city, in a hotel 11 floors below where the wedding had taken place, a woman named Donna Marte had accepted a job offer. She had gone in on Monday morning, as she had said she would, and she had given Gerald her answer, and Gerald had written something in his notepad and shaken her hand. That afternoon, Harold had appeared in the doorway of the break room, with his reading glasses at the end of his nose, and an expression that, for Harold, was as close to overwhelmed as he ever allowed himself to get. I heard, he said. I know you heard, Donna said. Good, he said. He stood in the doorway for a moment, not moving. Then he said, You should have had it 2 years ago. That's what Gerald said. Gerald is right for once. He turned to go. Then he stopped. He turned back. Donna, he said. Harold. I'm glad someone was paying attention. She smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that has a lot behind it. So am I, she said. 6 months later, the Meridian Hotel's banquet floor ran differently. Not dramatically differently, not in a way that announced itself. If you had come to the hotel the year before, and come again now, you might not have been able to name what had changed, but you would have felt it. The way a room that has been organized thoughtfully feels different from one that simply functions. The way a team that is well led moves differently from one that is simply managed. Donna had taken the supervisory position and turned it into something that was, within 3 months, nearly unrecognizable from what it had been. Not because she redesigned the processes, because she paid attention to the people inside them. She remembered Oliver, who was still learning. She put him on the banquet floor for the private evening events, the smaller ones where pressure was lower and guests were fewer, and she stayed nearby the first few times, not hovering, not correcting every motion, but present. She watched him find his footing. She watched him begin to move the way the good ones moved, economically, with intention, with the particular radar that distinguishes a server who is doing a job from one who is reading a room. One evening after a corporate dinner, Oliver found her near the service cart and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead," she said. "How do you know when to refill a glass before someone asks? Like, is it a timing thing? Or a pattern? Or—" She thought about this. "It's both," she said. "And it's neither. You watch people. Not their glass. People. The glass tells you when it's empty. People tell you when they're about to need it to be full." He looked at her with the expression of someone who had been given an answer that required further thinking. "You'll get it," she said. "You're already getting it." He was. She could see it. She filed this away in the private record she kept of every person on her team, not on paper, but in the way she always kept things, in the part of her mind that had always been attentive to what people needed before they said it. Petra still brought rice cakes on Tuesdays. Louis still brought coffee on Fridays. These things did not change. Some things were not supposed to change. What changed was the paperwork that Donna had discovered on her first day in the supervisory role. The backlog of staff scheduling conflicts, the inconsistencies in break time allocation, the absence of any formal process for reporting guest misconduct that didn't involve a direct escalation to management. She worked through all of it methodically. Not quickly. Properly. She created a simple reporting form, 1 page, clear language, the way she wanted everything, clear. She submitted it to Gerald, who submitted it to Richard Holt, who signed off on it within a week, and sent it to all 3 properties, with a note that it was based on a model developed by the banquet floor supervisor at the Meridian. He did not need to name her. The form had her handwriting all over it, in the sense that it was precise and practical, and bore no resemblance to anything written by a committee. Harold told her about the note. He told her while eating a Tuesday rice cake in the break room, with an expression of satisfaction that he had kept very low-key, which was its own kind of loudness. "Richard sent it to all 3 properties," he said. "I heard," she said. "With your name." "Without my name," she said. "With a reference to your work," he said, which was his way of insisting on the point without arguing it. She let him have it. She was not interested in credit in the way she had once quietly wished for it. She had been through enough years of work that went unacknowledged to know that acknowledgement felt good, but was not the foundation. The foundation was the work itself. The feeling, at the end of a long shift, of having done the thing well, of having looked at a room and understood what it needed, and given it that. That feeling belonged entirely to her, and had never required anyone else's signature. The supervisor position did give her something she had not expected. Silence. Not the silence of being ignored. The silence of not having to spend energy on things that didn't belong to her anymore. When a guest was difficult, she handled it, cleanly and directly. When a staff member made a mistake, she addressed it privately, in the particular way that she had learned from years of watching how correction either builds a person or shrinks them, and choosing, always, the approach that built. She had not encountered another situation like the one on the night of the wedding. She thought, sometimes, that she might. That it was inevitable. That a floor full of guests and a floor full of servers would, at some point, produce another moment where someone decided to perform their frustration, or their self-importance, at the expense of whoever was standing nearest to them. When it happened, she would know what to do, and now she had the authority to do it. That was the difference. The conduct policy that Richard had drafted was in place. It was clear. It had been shared with the events coordination team at all 3 properties and was referenced in the contract package sent to every private event client. It was not a threat. It was a statement of how things worked here. Guests were expected to treat the staff with basic respect. If they did not, the event team had the authority to address it. It had already been invoked twice, both times at the other properties, both times quietly, without public confrontation, with a polite and firm note from the floor supervisor to the event organizer. Both times the behavior had stopped. The world did not need a confrontation to change. Sometimes it needed a piece of paper that said, "This is the standard," and someone with the authority to hold it. Valentina Calloway returned to the Meridian on a Thursday morning in November. She had not planned the visit specifically. Marcus's firm was entertaining a prospective client for a business lunch, and the Meridian's private dining room had been the client's preference because they had hosted an event there the previous spring and found the service exceptional. Marcus had made the reservation himself. He had not mentioned to Valentina that it was the Meridian until the morning of. She had paused when he said it. A brief pause. "That hotel?" she said. "Their private dining room is one of the better ones in the city," Marcus said. "The client asked for it." She said nothing further. She wore a dark coat and low heels and had her hair pulled back neatly. She arrived with Marcus and the client, a careful man named Jeffrey who spoke slowly and listened faster, and 2 people from Marcus's team who had prepared extensively for this particular meeting, because the contract they were discussing would matter significantly. The reservation was under the Calloway firm name. A member of the front desk team confirmed it and directed them to the private dining room on the 2nd floor. Donna was on the floor that morning. She was in the corridor near the dining rooms when the group arrived, moving between the 2nd and 3rd private spaces with the particular efficiency of someone who always knows where she needs to be before she needs to be there. She saw the group at the elevator. She registered the reservation name because she always registered reservation names. She turned and walked to the dining room to make sure the setup was in order before they arrived. It was. She was standing near the service station when they came in. She moved forward to confirm the booking and introduce the server assigned to the table. She had recognized the name. She had not recognized the face when she saw it in the corridor, because she had not been looking for it. But as the group settled at the table and she stepped forward, she saw the woman from the wedding. There was no dramatic pause, no sharp intake of breath, just a moment, a very small one, where her mind confirmed what her eyes were showing her, and she let it settle, and then she moved on. Because this was how it worked. This was the job. The job was the same regardless of who was sitting at the table. "Good morning," Donna said. She addressed the table evenly, making brief eye contact with each person. "I want to confirm your reservation and make sure everything is in order before your lunch begins." She confirmed the booking. She introduced the server, a focused young woman named Claire, who had been at the hotel 2 years and was very good. She offered water service and asked if there were any dietary considerations the kitchen should know about. Jeffrey said he preferred still water. The others said sparkling. She made a note. Marcus watched her the entire time. Donna did not look at him specifically. She was professional. She was unhurried. She was the same person she had always been in this building, except now she wore a different jacket and a supervisor's badge, and she moved through the room with the particular ease of someone who has stopped waiting for permission. Valentina had looked up when Donna introduced herself. She had looked at the badge. She had looked at Donna's face. She did not recognize her. The moment stretched 1 beat past the normal beat for a greeting, and then Valentina said, "Thank you," and looked back down at the menu. Donna turned to Claire and said a few quiet words about the table's preferences. Then she moved toward the door to let the lunch begin. At the threshold she paused, not visibly, not in any way that would draw attention. Just a fraction of a second, she noted the room, the client with his careful attention, Marcus with his professional mask that she could see was covering something more complicated, the 2 team members who were ready, the woman with the dark coat who was reading the menu without looking up. Then she stepped into the corridor. She had 3 other events running simultaneously in the 2nd floor spaces, a corporate presentation in the far room, a small private breakfast wrapping up in the middle room. Oliver was covering the floor there, and she had already seen him moving with the kind of confidence that comes not from being told you are good, but from beginning to believe it for yourself. She went to check on the breakfast. The lunch in the private dining room lasted 2 hours. Jeffrey was methodical and unhurried in his decision-making, which Marcus had anticipated and prepared for. The conversation moved well. Claire was excellent at the table, present without being intrusive, anticipating without hovering. The food was good, the room was warm and well lit and quiet. At the end of the meal, Jeffrey said to Marcus, "This is a good place." "It is," Marcus agreed. "Good service. You feel like the staff actually care about the room." Marcus looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "They've been doing some thoughtful things here recently. I think it shows." Jeffrey nodded. He signed the check. On the way out, in the elevator, Valentina said quietly to Marcus, "She didn't know who I was." Marcus looked straight ahead at the elevator doors. "She knew," he said. Valentina was quiet for a moment. "How can you be sure?" The elevator opened onto the lobby. Marble floor, bright and wide, the morning light coming through the front windows. "Because she's good at her job," Marcus said. He walked toward the entrance. "And good people don't use their job as a weapon." Valentina followed. She didn't answer. Outside, the city was moving in its usual way, indifferent, continuous, full of people going where they were going, without looking at each other much. Taxis and foot traffic, and the particular sound of a midweek morning in a city that was always slightly too busy. Jeffrey shook Marcus's hand on the steps and said his team would be in touch by Friday. He left in a car that had been waiting. Marcus's team said their goodbyes and walked toward the parking structure. Marcus and Valentina stood on the steps of the Meridian. "She was a supervisor," Valentina said. "Yes," Marcus said. "She wasn't one before." "No," he said. "She wasn't." He buttoned his coat. The November air had turned cold in the last 2 weeks, the kind of cold that came in quickly and stayed. "I should say something," Valentina said. She didn't move. "To her? I don't know." A pause. "Maybe." Marcus looked at her. This was a version of his wife he had seen only a handful of times, the version that had arrived somewhere, quietly and without announcement, at the edge of something it cost her to see clearly. "That's your choice," he said simply. She stood there for another moment. Then she said, "She was carrying a water pitcher, and I spoke to her like she was furniture." Marcus said nothing. "I do that," Valentina said. "I don't always notice when I'm doing it." The traffic moved past. A couple came down the hotel steps behind them and went past them into the city. A small child was running ahead of his father on the pavement across the street, the father jogging slightly to keep up. "You could notice from now on," Marcus said. "It was not forgiveness. It was not an accusation. It was just the simplest possible thing he could say. Not what you did, but what you could do differently." She nodded slowly. They walked down the steps. Upstairs on the second floor, Donna was reviewing the afternoon booking sheets with Claire and making a note about the setup for a private dinner that evening. It was a large booking, 30 guests. She had already walked the room twice and identified 2 things she wanted adjusted before the guests arrived. She made her notes. She spoke to the kitchen coordinator. She checked in with Oliver, who was finishing the breakfast room cleanup, and who told her without being asked that all the guests had departed, the room was fully cleared, and he had already reset it for the afternoon meeting that was scheduled for 2:30. She looked at him over the top of her notepad. "Good," she said. He smiled the way people smile when the word is simple, and the thing behind it is not. She moved on. The afternoon was long and full, the way good afternoons are. One situation after another, each one manageable, each one different, each one asking something of her that she was capable of giving. At 4 o'clock she drank a coffee in the break room in 7 minutes flat because that was all the time available, and Petra sat across from her with a rice cake and said nothing at all for the whole 7 minutes, which was exactly what Donna needed. At 5:30 she walked the evening room one final time. 30 place settings, linen smooth, glasses polished, flowers arranged without being excessive. She stood in the center of the empty room and looked at it the way she always looked at a room before the guests arrived, with the particular pleasure of someone who knows that the work they have done is invisible, and who has made peace with the fact that invisible work is still work, and that the invisibility is not the same as unimportance. She turned off the lights she didn't need. She left the ones she did. The evening guests would arrive in 1 hour. The room would fill. People would eat and talk and celebrate whatever it was they had come to celebrate. And the room would do what a well-run room always does: hold them comfortably, serve them without asking to be thanked for it, and return to stillness afterward without complaint. She went to check on her team. The floor was ready. Everything was as it should be.